Jake Miller floated in his beaten-up salvage ship, eyes half closed as he watched the stars drift by. Another slow day in the VRYNN Nebula. Another day of finding nothing but space junk and broken satellites. His scanner had been quiet for hours. Just the usual beeps and static that meant absolutely nothing interesting was happening out here. Then everything changed in an instant. The scanner went crazy. Lights flashed red across his control panel, and a loud alarm started blaring through the small cabin. Jake jerked upright in his seat, his coffee floating away in zero gravity as he grabbed the controls. His screen showed a massive ship about 2 miles ahead, and it was in serious trouble. Flames were shooting out from huge tears in the hull, which shouldn't even be possible in the vacuum of space. Whatever was burning, and it was burning hot enough to create its own oxygen. His AI spoke up in that calm, annoying voice it always used. Diplomatic vessel detected. Hull integrity at 12% and falling. Estimated time until complete structural collapse. 7 minutes, 14 seconds. Jake stared at the burning ship. It was huge, way bigger than anything he could handle. The smart move, the safe move, was to turn around and get out of there before it exploded and took him with it. He reached for the thruster controls, ready to punch it and leave this mess behind. This wasn't his job. He wasn't a rescue worker. He was just a guy who picked up scrap metal and sold it to pay his bills. His hand froze on the controls. Through all the static and crackling on the radio, he heard something that made his blood run cold. Voices, small voices, high-pitched screaming that could only mean one thing. There were kids on that ship. Are you kidding me? Jake slammed his fist on the console. He knew what he had to do, even though every logical part of his brain was screaming at him to run. Scanning for life signs. Come on, tell me where they are. The AI responded immediately. 7 life signs detected in Sector 4, Deck 9. Warning. Route is blocked by multiple fires and structural damage. Survival probability for rescue attempt is... I don't want to hear it. Jake cut the AI off. He was already strapping on his emergency suit and grabbing his cutting torch. His hands shook a little as he sealed the helmet. 6 minutes left now, maybe less. Jake fired the grappling cables from his ship. They shot across space and latched onto the burning vessel with a solid thunk. He activated the winch, and his small ship pulled closer, the heat from the fires making his hull groan and creak. His suit's external temperature gauge was climbing fast, way too fast. He lined up with what was left of an airlock and fired his torch. The cutting beam sliced through the twisted metal like butter. The moment he pulled the section away, smoke and sparks blasted out into space. Jake pushed through, magnetic boots clanging against the floor as he entered the dying ship. It was chaos inside. The corridor was a nightmare of fire, exposed wiring and floating debris. Emergency lights flickered on and off, casting everything in a hellish red glow. The walls were hot enough that he could feel it through his insulated suit. His visor display showed the path to the life signs, but half the corridors were completely blocked. 5 minutes. The AI warned in his helmet. Jake ran, or as close to running as you could get in mag boots. He kicked through a jammed door, climbed over a collapsed beam, and squeezed through a gap where the ceiling had partially caved in. The heat was getting worse. His suit was designed for space walks, not walking through an inferno. He found them in what looked like some kind of fancy ceremonial chamber. 7 small figures huddled together in the center of the room, surrounded by growing flames. They weren't human. Their skin was purple, almost glowing in the firelight, and their eyes were huge and golden, filled with absolute terror. They wore elaborate robes that looked expensive, probably silk or something similar, but now the edges were burning and falling apart. The children saw him and screamed louder. They probably thought he was some kind of monster in his bulky rescue suit. Hey, it's okay. Jake held up his hands, trying to look non-threatening. I'm here to help. Come on, we gotta go now. The kids didn't understand English. They just stared at him with those huge golden eyes, frozen in fear. Jake didn't have time for this. 3.5 minutes left. He ran forward and grabbed 2 of them, one under each arm. They were lighter than human kids. Thank God. Move. All of you, follow me. He pointed toward the door and started herding them like scared puppies. They got the idea and stumbled after him. The smallest one, a little girl who couldn't have been more than 5 in human years, tripped over her burning robe and fell. The ceiling above them groaned, and a section of metal started to give way. Jake dropped to his knees and scooped her up with one arm, while still holding another kid with the other. She wrapped her tiny arms around his neck and buried her face in his shoulder. "I got you, kid. I got you." Jake ran back through the burning corridors, the 7 children following as best they could. 2 of the older ones helped the younger ones keep up. Jake's suit was screaming warnings at him now. External temperature critical. Oxygen at 40%. Hull stress detected. They made it to the airlock he'd cut through. Jake practically threw the kids through the opening into his ship's airlock, then dove in after them. He slammed his fist on the emergency seal button. The door closed just as a massive explosion rocked the diplomatic vessel. His ship's auto-disconnect kicked in and the grapples released. "Go, go, go!" Jake shouted, and his ship's thrusters fired at maximum burn. They shot away from the dying vessel. Through the viewport, Jake and the 7 children watched as the massive ship tore itself apart in a brilliant explosion that lit up the entire nebula like a second sun. For a moment, nobody moved. Jake sat on the floor of his airlock, chest heaving. 7 alien children piled around him. The smallest girl was still clinging to his neck. They were all crying, making these soft chirping sounds that must have been how their species cried. Jake pulled off his helmet and took a deep breath. His hand was shaking. That had been way too close. "You're safe now," he said quietly, knowing they couldn't understand but hoping his tone would calm them down. He awkwardly patted the little girl's back. "You're safe. It's over." He activated the medical bay and started checking each child for injuries. Burns, mostly minor. Some cuts and bruises. Nothing life-threatening. They'd been incredibly lucky. As Jake worked, he wondered who these kids were and what had happened to that ship. Those robes looked expensive. This was going to be complicated. He had no idea just how complicated things were about to get. Jake spent the next 20 hours trying to figure out what to do with 7 alien kids who didn't speak a word of English. He'd given them food from his emergency rations, which they picked at nervously. He'd shown them how to use the bathroom, which led to some awkward pointing and nodding. The little girl who clung to him during the rescue stayed close, following him around his tiny ship like a shadow. He was in the middle of trying to play some kind of card game with them, using hand gestures to explain the rules, when every alarm on his ship started screaming at once. Jake bolted to the cockpit and felt his heart stop. His radar screen had gone completely red. Ships were appearing out of nowhere, dozens of them, then hundreds. Massive warships with weapons that could vaporize his little salvage vessel without even slowing down. They materialized from hyperspace in perfect formation, creating a sphere around him with no gaps, no escape routes. Oh no, oh no, no, no. Jake's hands flew over controls, but there was nothing he could do. He was boxed in completely. A voice boomed through his speakers, so loud it made him wince. "Unidentified vessel. This is a Keltharian Imperial fleet. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Any attempt to flee will be met with immediate destruction." Jake's hand shot up over his head automatically, even though he knew nobody could see him through the walls of his ship. "Don't shoot. I've got survivors." 7 kids from the wreck in the nebula. They're alive and safe. Silence. The kind of silence that makes your skin crawl and your stomach twist into knots. Jake stared at the radio, waiting. The 7 children had come into the cockpit and were pressed against the walls, their golden eyes wide with fear again. Then a different voice came through the speakers. This one was female, but it sounded old, ancient, the kind of voice that had seen empires rise and fall. It had power in it that made Jake want to stand at attention even though he was alone in his own ship. "Human." The word came out slow and deliberate. "You will transport the children to our flagship immediately. They must be unharmed." "They're fine," Jake said quickly, relief flooding through him. At least they weren't going to blow him up. Just scared. A little banged up, but nothing serious. "Look, I didn't know this was some kind of diplomatic thing. I just heard kids screaming, and I couldn't just leave them there to die." Another pause. Jake could hear breathing on the other end, heavy and controlled, like someone trying very hard to keep their emotions in check. You saved the royal heirs, the voice said. And now there was a crack in it, a hint of something raw underneath all that power. My grandchildren, you will be brought before me. The words hit Jake like a physical blow. Royal heirs, grandchildren. He looked at the 7 kids huddled in his cockpit, with their fancy burned robes and those huge, terrified eyes, and suddenly everything made sense. The ceremonial chamber, the expensive clothes, the diplomatic vessel. Oh, man, Jake whispered. Oh, man, I rescued alien royalty. His stomach dropped straight through the floor. This was bad. This was really, really bad. Governments got weird about their royal families. What if they thought he'd kidnapped them? What if they thought this was some kind of ransom situation? He could end up in an alien prison, or worse. The next hour was a blur. A docking tube extended from a massive flagship, and attached to his ship was a solid clunk. Soldiers in ornate armor came aboard, their weapons ready but not pointed at him. They spoke softly to the children in their own language, and the kids ran to them, chattering excitedly and pointing back at Jake. One of the soldiers, taller than the others with more decorations on his armor, approached Jake. Come with us. Human, the Empress wishes to see you. Jake didn't have much choice. He followed them through the docking tube and into the flagship. The interior was nothing like his beat-up salvage vessel. Everything gleamed. The walls were made of some kind of polished stone that seemed to glow from within. Patterns of light moved across the surfaces, like living art. Guards lined the corridors, standing perfectly still as they passed. They led him to a massive set of doors that must have been 30 feet tall. The doors swung open silently, and Jake stepped into the most incredible room he'd ever seen. It was huge, big enough to fit his entire ship, inside with room to spare. The ceiling curved up into a dome covered in stars, but they weren't projections. Somehow, they'd built the ceiling out of transparent material that looked straight out into space. At the far end of the room, on a throne made of the same glowing stone as the walls, sat the Empress. She was massive, 9 feet tall at least, maybe more. Her skin wasn't purple like the children's, but covered in scales that shimmered every color of the rainbow, like opals catching the light. She wore robes that flowed like water, and on her head sat a crown that seemed to be made of living crystal, growing and shifting as he watched. Jake felt very, very small. The 7 children were already there. The moment they saw the Empress, they broke free from their guards and ran to her, all talking at once in their language. She swept them up in her arms, all 7 of them, and held them close. Her eyes were closed, and she was making a low humming sound that Jake somehow knew was their version of crying. After a long moment, she set them down gently and turned her golden eyes on Jake. He tried not to squirm under that gaze. It felt like she was looking right through him, seeing everything he'd ever done, every thought he'd ever had. "Human Jake Miller," she said, her voice filling the entire throne room. "Do you understand what you've done?" "I just pulled some kids out of a burning ship, ma'am," Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I heard them screaming, and I couldn't just leave them." "You invoked the sacred debt," the Empress said. She stood up from her throne and walked down the steps toward him. Each footstep echoed like thunder. "You saved royal blood when no reward was promised, when you had no knowledge of who they were, when you gained nothing from the act. By the ancient laws of my people, I am now bound to you." Jake blinked. "Bound? What does that mean?" "Look, I really don't need anything. I'm just glad the kids are okay." The Empress stopped right in front of him. Up close, she was even more intimidating. "You do not understand. Human, the sacred debt has not been invoked in 10,000 years. The last time this happened, it reshaped our entire civilization. What I must give you will shake this galaxy to its very foundations." The little girl who clung to Jake during the rescue tugged on the Empress's robe and said something in their language. The Empress looked down at her, then back at Jake, and for the first time, something like a smile crossed her face. "My youngest granddaughter says you are brave and kind," she translated. "She says you smell funny, but you have a good heart." Despite everything, Jake laughed. The tension in the room broke, just a little, but the Empress's expression turned serious again. "Prepare yourself, Jake Miller. Your life as you knew it is over. Tomorrow, before the entire galaxy, I will give you what the sacred debt demands. And nothing will ever be the same. The Keltharian homeworld took Jake's breath away the moment the shuttle broke through the atmosphere. He pressed his face against the window like a kid in an aquarium, unable to believe what he was seeing. Entire cities floated in the sky, massive platforms of crystal and metal that somehow defied gravity. Bridges made of pure light connected them, streams of blue and white energy that people walked across like they were solid ground. In the distance, mountains rose up so high their peaks disappeared into clouds, and every single one had been carved into temples. Jake could see the faces of ancient rulers and gods hundreds of feet tall, watching over the valleys below. Gardens hung in the air between buildings, green and lush with plants that glowed softly in the twilight. Rivers flowed upward, defying everything Jake knew about physics. "This is impossible," Jake muttered. The guard sitting across from him in the shuttle smiled slightly. "For humans, perhaps we have had 10,000 years to build our world." They landed in front of the Grand Temple, and Jake's jaw dropped again. The building was enormous, larger than any stadium back on Earth. It was carved from a single piece of white stone that seemed to shine from within. Thousands of steps led up to the entrance, where doors covered in gold stood open, waiting. People were everywhere. Millions of them lined the streets, hung from windows, crowded every rooftop and balcony. They were all silent, watching him. Jake had never felt so many eyes on him at once. His hands started sweating. "Why are there so many people?" Jake asked nervously. "The ceremony is being broadcast across the entire empire," the guard explained. "Billions are watching. This has not happened in 10,000 years. Every citizen wants to witness this moment." Jake's stomach did a flip. Billions. He'd gone from being a nobody salvage worker to having billions of aliens watching his every move. This was insane. They dressed him in ceremonial robes that felt wrong on his body. The fabric was too smooth, too perfect, and it shimmered with colors that didn't exist in nature. He looked at himself in a mirror and barely recognized the guy staring back. He looked like he was playing dress-up in someone else's culture. "I can't do this," Jake said to his reflection. "I'm not whoever they think I am." But he didn't have a choice. Guards led him up those thousands of steps, and his legs were burning by the time he reached the top. The inside of the temple was even more breathtaking than the outside. The ceiling stretched up so high it might as well have been the sky itself. Pillars of crystal rose from the floor, each one carved with thousands of names. Incense burned in golden bowls, filling the air with a smell like cinnamon and something else he couldn't identify. And there, at the center of it all, stood the Empress on a raised platform. Behind her, projected on a screen the size of a building, Jake could see his own face. Cameras were recording everything. This was really happening. This was real. The temple was packed with people. Important-looking aliens in fancy clothes stood in rows, all watching him. Jake recognized some of them from news broadcasts he'd seen over the years. Leaders of other species, ambassadors, military commanders. Anyone who was anyone in the galaxy was here. The Empress raised her hand, and the entire temple fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop. "We gather today." Her voice boomed through speakers that carried it to every corner of the world, to honor the sacred debt. 10,000 years have passed since last this ancient law was invoked. Today, a human has reminded us what it means to be truly noble. Jake stood there awkwardly as she spoke, not knowing where to look or what to do with his hands. He settled for keeping them at his sides and trying not to pass out. The Empress descended from her platform and walked toward him. In her hand, she carried a blade made of crystal that glowed with an inner light. It looked sharp enough to cut through anything. Jake's eyes went wide. "Wait, what's happening here?" The Empress stopped in front of him. "Be still, Guardian. This is the binding ceremony. It will not harm you permanently." "Permanently? What do you mean permanently?" Jake took a step back, but guards had moved in behind him. There was nowhere to go. The Empress pressed the crystal blade against her own palm. Blue blood welled up, bright and glowing like liquid sapphire. Then, before Jake could protest, she took his hand and pressed the blade against his palm too. He hissed in pain as it cut through his skin. Red blood mixed with blue on the blade between them. "By the sacred debt," the Empress said, her voice carrying across the entire planet, "I bind my life to yours." My authority becomes yours. My empire answers to you as it answers to me. From this moment forward, you are not merely a citizen of Keltheria. You are its guardian." Gasps echoed to the massive temple. People in the crowd looked shocked, some even angry. Jake heard whispers spreading like wildfire. From this moment, the Empress continued, raising their joined hands so everyone could see the mixed blood. Jake Miller is Guardian Prime of the Keltherian Empire. His word carries the weight of law. His decisions are final and binding. He stands equal to the throne itself in all matters of state. Jake's knees went weak. Equal to the throne? That meant he basically owned half an empire. Him, a guy who made his living picking up space junk. "I'm just a salvage guy," Jake said, his voice cracking. "I fix broken ships and sell scrap metal. I can't run an empire. I don't know anything about politics or military strategy or any of this." The Empress's expression softened. She released his hand and placed both of hers on his shoulders. "You must. Do you know why the sacred debt exists, Jake Miller? It exists because true nobility is not found in bloodlines or titles. It is found in actions taken when no one is watching, when no reward is expected. You risked your life for children you had never met. You didn't know they were royal. You didn't know you would receive anything in return. You helped them because it was right." She turned to address the crowd. "That is the mark of true guardianship. That is why our ancestors created this law. Power must sometimes be given to those who do not seek it, for they're the only ones who can be trusted with it." Jake stood there, his hands still bleeding, trying to process what had just happened. Across the galaxy, in government buildings and military command centers, and living rooms on 1,000 worlds, people were having emergency meetings. A human with control over the Keltherian Empire's military, the most powerful fighting force in known space, now answering to someone who had been nobody just 2 days ago. Leaders were panicking. Stock markets were crashing. Some species were calling for immediate action. But in the temple, something else was happening. The 7 children walked forward through the crowd. They'd been cleaned up and dressed in fresh royal robes, but Jake recognized each one immediately. The oldest boy led the way, and the others followed in a line. They stopped in front of Jake and bowed low. The entire temple went silent again. The smallest one, the little girl Jake had carried to the fire, broke from the line and took his hand. She looked up at him with those huge golden eyes, and when she spoke, it was in careful, practiced English. "Guardian Prime," she said softly, stumbling a bit over the words but getting them out. "Thank you. You saved us. You are good." Jake felt tears stinging his eyes. He knelt down so he was at her level and gently squeezed her hand. "You're welcome, kid. I'm glad you're safe." The other 6 children moved forward and embraced him. They were all talking at once in their language, but Jake didn't need to understand the words to know what they were saying. They were thanking him. They were telling him he was one of them now. The Empress watched this scene and nodded approvingly. "The children have spoken. The bond is sealed. Let the galaxy tremble, if it must. The sacred debt has been paid, and a new guardian walks among us." Jake stood up, surrounded by 7 royal children, who looked at him like he'd hung the stars in the sky. His hand still hurt from the cut. His head was spinning from everything that had happened. But somehow, despite all the insanity, he felt like maybe this was exactly where he was supposed to be, even if he had no idea what he was doing. 3 weeks into his new role as Guardian Prime, Jake was sitting in yet another boring council meeting when someone tried to kill him. He was listening to 2 admirals argue about fleet positions, try his best to follow along, even though half the military terms went right over his head. The council chamber was massive, with a round table that could seat 50 people. Holographic displays floated in the air showing star maps and ship formations. Jake was rubbing his tired eyes, wondering how anyone stayed awake through these meetings, when he heard a sound like crackling electricity. Instinct made him lean forward to grab his water glass at that exact moment. A bolt of superheated plasma screamed past his head, so close he felt the heat on his scalp. It slammed into the wall behind him and left a smoking hole the size of a basketball. The room exploded into chaos. Guards appeared from nowhere, their weapons drawn. Jake dove under the table, his heart hammering in his chest. More plasma bolts flew overhead, and he heard shouting in the Caltharian language, then a scream that cut off suddenly. When the shooting stopped, Jake slowly emerged from under the table. His guards had tackled someone to the ground near the entrance. An older Caltharian male in expensive robes, his face twisted with hate. He was still struggling, even though he had 5 guards holding him down. "Inferior parasite!" The attacker screamed at Jake in accented English. "You do not belong here. Humans are nothing. You corrupt our empire with your presence." They dragged him away, still screaming insults. Jake stood there shaking, staring at the burn mark on the wall where his head had been seconds ago. If he hadn't reached for that water glass, he'd be dead right now. The council meeting ended early after that. Everyone was too rattled to continue. Back in his quarters, Jake sat on the edge of his bed with his head in his hands. The rooms they'd given him were enormous and fancy, with windows that looked out over floating cities. But right now he barely noticed any of it. His hands were still trembling. Ambassador meetings every morning. Military briefings every afternoon. Cultural protocol lessons every evening. Learning to read Caltharian. Learning their customs. Trying to understand 1,000-year-old treaties and alliances. And for what? So nobles could try to shoot him in council meetings? Jake had just wanted to help some kids. Now he was drowning in responsibilities he never asked for, making decisions that affected billions of lives. And apparently half the empire thought he was some kind of contamination that needed to be removed. Maybe they're right, Jake muttered to himself. Maybe I don't belong here. A soft knock on his door made him look up. "Guardian Prime," a young voice called. "May we speak with you?" Before Jake could answer, the door slid open and the 7 royal children filed in. They'd barely left his side since the rescue, following him to meetings, eating meals with him, even sleeping in rooms next to his because they felt safer close by. The oldest, a boy named Prince Talon, who was maybe 13 in human years, led the way. Behind him came the others, ranging down to little Princess Vera, the smallest one who clung to Jake during the fire. She was carrying a stuffed animal that looked like a cross between a teddy bear and a dragon. "We heard about the attack," Talon said, his English getting better every day. "Are you hurt?" "No, I'm fine. Just shaken up." Jake tried to smile, but it felt fake. "You kids should be in bed. It's late." "We were worried," said one of the middle children, a girl named Princess Mira. She had paint on her fingers from art class. "The guard said that Noble called you bad names." "Yeah. Well, he's not the only one who thinks I don't belong here," Jake said. He hadn't meant to say it out loud, but the words just came out. Maybe your people deserve better than some random human who doesn't know what he's doing. The children looked at each other. Then Talon stepped forward and sat down next to Jake on the bed. "May I tell you something, Guardian Prime? You can just call me Jake, you know?" "No," Talon said firmly. "You are Guardian Prime. You earned that title, and I want to tell you why." He took a breath. "Do you remember the VRYNN trade dispute last week?" Jake nodded. It had been a mess. 2 species fighting over mining rights to an asteroid belt, both threatening war. The Caltharian admirals had wanted to back one side with military force, which would have dragged the whole empire into a conflict. "Our admirals wanted war," Talon continued. "They said we must show strength, must choose a side and crush the other. It is the Caltharian way. We have always solved problems with power." He paused. "But you asked a question. You said, why can't they both mine different parts of the belt? Space is big enough for everyone. Do you remember?" "Yeah, and everyone looked at me like I was an idiot," Jake said. "No," Talon shook his head. "They looked at you like you were speaking a foreign language. Because to us, that solution was impossible. Someone must win. Someone must lose. That is how we think." He smiled. "But you are human. You think differently. You suggested they share the resource, map out territories, trade what they each find. Simple. Too simple," Jake muttered. "The admirals practically laughed at me. But it worked." Princess Mira chimed in excitedly. "Both sides agreed yesterday. No war. No deaths. They are signing the treaty tomorrow." Jake blinked. "They are—" "Yes," Talon said, "because your simple idea was actually brilliant. We Keltharians, we ask, why should we compromise? We think about honor and strength and tradition. But you ask, why not compromise? You see the problem with fresh eyes. Little Princess Vera climbed onto Jake's lap. Her stuffed dragon bear squished between them. You are good at this, she said in her careful English. You help people. That is what guardians do. One by one, the other children shared stories. Times when Jake's questions had made councils rethink old assumptions. Times when his outsider perspective had cut through decades of political deadlock. He'd been so focused on his own confusion that he hadn't realized he was actually making a difference. The noble who attacked you, Talon said quietly, he represents the old way, the way that says only Keltharians can lead Keltharians. But my grandmother chose you for a reason. The sacred debt is not just about owing someone. It is about recognizing true worth. Over the next month, Jake stopped trying to be a Keltharian and started being himself. When admirals propose aggressive military responses, he asked simple questions. Have we tried talking to them first? What if we offer them something they need? Could this be solved without anyone dying? Questions that seemed almost childish, but that forced people to stop and think. He mediated a border dispute that had festered for 50 years by suggesting both sides build a shared space station on the border and run it together. He ended a trade war by pointing out that both planets made things the other needed. So why not just trade instead of fighting about tariffs? Simple solutions. Human solutions. But they worked. Slowly, the resistance began to fade. Nobles who grumbled about the human outsider started admitting, grudgingly, that maybe he had a point. Military commanders who'd rolled their eyes at his suggestions started asking for his input. Ambassadors from other species started requesting meetings with him specifically, saying he was easier to negotiate with than traditional Keltharian leaders. Jake still felt like he was faking it half the time. He still went to bed wondering if he'd made the right choices. But the 7 children were always there, reminding him why he was doing this. And slowly, he started to believe what they'd told him. Maybe being an outsider wasn't a weakness. Maybe it was exactly what the Keltharian Empire needed. Princess Vera had taken to following him everywhere, holding his hand during official functions. One day, after Jake successfully negotiated a peaceful end to a mining colony rebellion, she looked up at him and smiled. See, she said simply, you are a good guardian. And for the first time since the ceremony, Jake thought maybe she was right. 2 years had passed since Jake pulled 7 terrified children from a burning ship. 2 years of learning, growing, and somehow not completely screwing up his role as Guardian Prime. Now he stood in the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council, facing representatives from 300 different species, and he was more nervous than he'd been during the assassination attempt. The chamber was incredible. It was built inside a hollow asteroid, with each species having their own section designed for their specific needs. Some floated in tanks of water. Others sat in chambers filled with methane gas. A few existed as pure energy, contained in special force fields. The variety of life in the galaxy still amazed Jake, even after 2 years of dealing with it daily. Jake walked to the center platform, his footsteps echoing in the massive space. Cameras from 1,000 news organizations were pointed at him. This was being broadcast across the entire galaxy. No pressure or anything. He cleared his throat. Thank you all for coming. I know some of you traveled a long way to be here. A few polite acknowledgments came from the crowd. I want to propose something today. Something I'm calling the Guardian Protocol. Murmurs spread through the chamber. Jake pulled up a holographic display that showed the text of his proposal in 300 different languages simultaneously. Here's the idea, Jake continued. Any person from any species, anywhere in the galaxy, who saves royal children without any expectation of reward, will be honored as a guardian, not to give them political power necessarily, but to recognize their courage, to show that heroism doesn't care about what planet you're from or what you look like. A representative from the VRYNN consortium, a species that looked like walking crystals, raised a limb to speak. Jake recognized him as Ambassador Krell, one of the diplomats who'd been most vocal about opposing Jake's appointment 2 years ago. Guardian Prime. Krell's voice chimed like bells. When you first took this position, many of us, myself included, believed it was a mistake. We thought humans were too young, Too reckless, too emotional to hold such power. He paused, and the entire chamber went quiet. We were wrong. Jake blinked in surprise. Krell continued. In 2 years, you prevented 4 wars, negotiated 17 major trade agreements, and resolved conflicts that have festered for centuries. You did this not through force or intimidation, but through simple questions and honest compassion. You have proven that wisdom comes not from age or tradition, but from seeing problems with fresh eyes and a good heart. The VRYNN ambassador bowed, which was a huge sign of respect in their culture. The VRYNN consortium votes in favor of the Guardian Protocol. We believe the galaxy needs more people like you, Guardian Prime, regardless of their species. Jake felt emotion welling up in his chest. Coming from someone who'd called him a dangerous liability 2 years ago, those words meant everything. One by one, other ambassadors stood to speak. Some shared stories of how Jake's decisions had affected their worlds positively. Others talked about the symbolism of honoring selfless acts across all species. A few raised concerns about the practical details, but they were supportive of the core idea. The vote came 3 hours later. Of the 300 species represented, 294 voted in favor, 4 voted against, 2 abstained. The Guardian Protocol was now galactic law. Jake stood there, slightly stunned, as the chamber erupted in what passed for applause across 300 different species. Chirps, whistles, vibrations, and sound he couldn't even describe filled the air. After the session ended, the Empress found Jake in one of the side chambers. He was sitting alone, staring out at the stars through a transparent wall, trying to process what had just happened. You have exceeded every expectation, Guardian Prime, she said, settling into a seat beside him. Even sitting, she was taller than Jake standing. When I bound you to the sacred debt, I hoped you would be competent. Instead, you have been extraordinary. I just tried not to mess things up too badly, Jake said with a small smile. You united the galaxy through an act of simple decency, the Empress said. Do you understand how rare that is? Most councils are united through fear or necessity. You brought them together through hope. She looked at him curiously. So what will you do now, Jake Miller? You have the resources of an empire at your disposal. You could do anything. Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he smiled, a real genuine smile that reached his eyes. I want to go back to salvage work, if that's okay. The Empress's expression was priceless. Salvage work? You could command fleets, govern planets, shape the future of civilizations, and you want to pick up space junk. I miss it, Jake admitted. I miss the simplicity. Just me, my ship, and the stars. No council meetings, no protocols, no assassination attempts. Just honest work. He paused. Plus, I had an idea. Oh, the Empress leaned forward. This should be interesting. What if I took some apprentices? Jake gestured toward the doorway, where the 7 royal children, now teenagers, were waiting. They'd grown so much in 2 years. Prince Talon was almost as tall as Jake now. Princess Vera had lost her baby face and was turning into a confident young woman. I could teach them the salvage trade. Show them what life is like for regular working people. They've spent their whole lives in palaces. Maybe it's time they saw the galaxy from a different perspective. The Empress stared at him for a long moment. Then she started laughing. It was a sound like crystal bells ringing, musical and joyful. She laughed so hard she had to steady herself against the wall. My heirs, she managed between laughs. The future rulers of the Keltharian Empire, working as salvagers. The council will have a collective heart attack. The noble houses will riot. The military commanders will think I've gone insane. Probably, Jake agreed, grinning. The Empress wiped her eyes, still chuckling. I love it. Do it. They will learn more from you in a year of honest work than they would from a decade of palace tutors. Jake called the 7 teenagers into the room. They'd been eavesdropping anyway, which was obvious from their excited expressions. So, Jake said, looking at each of them, I'm going back to my old ship and my old life. Small crew, hard work, long hours in space. No servants, no fancy meals, no comfortable beds. You'll be scrubbing coolant lines, patching hull breaches, and sorting through actual garbage looking for anything valuable. Anyone interested? 7 hands shot up immediately. Prince Talon stepped forward, grinning from ear to ear. "When do we start, Guardian Prime?" "How about tomorrow?" Jake said. "Pack light. Space on a salvage ship is limited." Princess Vera, who'd been Jake's shadow for 2 years, rushed forward and hugged him around the waist. "This will be so much better than palace tutors." The other 5 chimed in with their agreement, all talking excitedly about what they'd need to bring and what salvage work would be like. The next morning, Jake's old ship, which had been repaired and maintained but still looked beaten up compared to Imperial vessels, sat on the landing pad. The 7 royal heirs loaded their bags, said goodbye to their grandmother, and climbed aboard. The Empress stood on her tower, watching through a telescope as the small salvage vessel powered up its engines. Around her, advisors were already complaining about the security risks, the impropriety, the scandal of it all. She ignored them all. As Jake's ship lifted off and turned toward open space, the Empress smiled. That human had taught her something important over the past 2 years. True nobility wasn't about bloodlines or crowns, or sitting on thrones making decrees. True nobility was about character, about choosing to help when you didn't have to, about doing the right thing even when no one was watching, and you get nothing in return. Jake had made that choice in a burning ship 2 years ago, and that single choice had rippled outward, changing not just 7 lives or 1 empire, but the entire galaxy. Inside the ship, Princess Vera took the co-pilot seat next to Jake while the others explored their new home. "Where are we going first?" she asked. Jake pulled up a star map, showing several distress beacons and salvage opportunities. "There's a broken-down cargo hauler about 3 days from here. Crew already evacuated, but there might be some valuable components we can recover. Sound good for first job?" "Sounds perfect," Vera said, her golden eyes shining with excitement. As they jumped to hyperspace, leaving the Keltharian homeworld behind, Jake realized something. He'd spent 2 years trying to figure out where he belonged, trying to live up to impossible expectations, trying to be something he wasn't. But now, flying through space with 7 kids who trusted him completely, doing the work he loved, he finally understood. He belonged exactly where he was. Not because of some ancient law or sacred debt, but because he'd chosen it. And that choice, like the choice to rescue burning children when he had nothing to gain, was what truly mattered. The galaxy had changed because one person chose to help, and it would keep changing one choice at a time, as long as people remember that lesson. True heroism wasn't about power or glory. It was about helping when no one was watching and expecting nothing in return. That was Jake's gift to the galaxy, and it would echo through the stars for generations to come.